This is Paige DeSorbo from Giggly Squad. Boost Mobile is no longer that prepaid wireless company you remember. They've invested billions into building their own 5G towers across America. With Boost Mobile's networks, customers enjoy the speed and service they'd expect from the big three. Plus, groundbreaking benefits you'd only get from a true challenger of the industry. Boost Mobile will let you try the network risk-free for 30 days. So visit your nearest Boost Mobile store or find us online at boostmobile.com today.
Under Biden, Americans' cost of living skyrocketed. Food, housing, auto insurance. Lawsuit abuse is a big reason everything's more expensive today. Frivolous lawsuits cost working Americans over $4,000 a year in hidden taxes. President Trump understands the problem. That's why he supports loser pays legislation to stop lawsuit abuse and put thousands back in the pockets of hardworking Americans. It's time to make America affordable again. It's time to support the president's plan.
Welcome again to the Explaining History podcast. Today I'm looking at Harold Wilson, the most successful peacetime British Prime Minister politically and arguably socially and economically of the 20th century. Wilson won 4 general elections between 1964 and 1976, and Wilson was a prime minister who, in 1966 alone, built 460,000 council houses. These are, for non-UK listeners, this is public-owned housing for working-class families primarily. Wilson presided over the foundation of the Open University, Britain's lifelong education institution that has seen, again, large numbers of working class people who would never have gone to university make it there. Wilson was not without fault either. Wilson kicked the can down the road in confronting an increasingly militant labour movement, trade union movement at the end of the 1960s, when his minister Barbara Castle came up with proposals in her famous In Place of Strife document. Wilson undermined them, fearing the backlash from the union bosses. The net result of that was that a decade later, Margaret Thatcher came to power with a mandate to break union power, which she did in the mid-1980s. And the result for working people has been fairly catastrophic. Wilson was often suspicious of and envious and fearful of the rising stars within his cabinet, and sought often to play strategic games to keep them at bay. Wilson refused to devalue the pound repeatedly until there's a forced shock devaluation in 1967. Wilson didn't want Labour to be seen as the party of devaluation. And by not devaluing the pound, he stores up economic problems for Britain towards the end of the 1960s, Britain has a growing welfare state and a growing and a large, very, very considerably, exceedingly large overseas military presence. Britain by the end of the 1960s is still trying to perform its role as a world power. And this is, with what they call bases east of Suez, and it becomes increasingly untenable. So Wilson does have his faults, but he's interesting in as much as the level of opposition from, without sounding kind of conspiratorial, Britain's secret state that he managed to generate. All Labour prime ministers of the 20th century, with the exception of Tony Blair, and I'll explain why in a moment, have been magnets for opprobrium and suspicion from the security services and from the kind of the British establishment that manages to thrive irrespective of election cycles. Of course, the Ramsay MacDonald first administration of 1924 is undone by Secret Service dirty tricks with the Zinoviev letter, which was an MI5 forgery, implying that Zinoviev, the head of Comintern, was calling for revolution in Great Britain and saying that, the time is right now, lads. We've got our comrades in power. And this is to, was published in the various reactionary newspapers, the Times it was, and it gives an impression of the Labour Party which is wholly misleading. The idea that it's really particularly radical at all. In the sort of the more lurid fantasies of the political right, the Labour Party is associated with some kind of hidden Trotskyism, and that's never been the case. The Labour Party has been a faithful party of state and establishment since its inception, and vocally so. Harold Wilson was insinuated by the right-wing press with briefings from MI5 men, and it was repeated in kind of right-wing reactionary circles in Britain that Wilson was some sort of communist or some sort of socialist. And neither claim is particularly true. Wilson was what you might think of as a corporatist. Wilson wanted to bring industry and the trade unions under one roof for collective bargaining within a broader national interest. Wilson's a very, very patriotic guy. Wilson was a fan of the royal family. He became one of the Queen's favourite prime ministers. Wilson believed, one of the reasons why he didn't want to devalue is he believed that a strong pound was a patriotic thing. So you're looking at a very, very nuanced figure, a very skillful political operator, somebody who believed that a kind of a more egalitarian Britain was a better Britain, and one in which the country would kind of thrive in the long term, which is fairly simplistic argument. He would often cosplay at being more working class than he was. He would, he said famously that he liked to have a cigar and champagne, but he would always be appearing smoking a pipe and having a pint of beer, and pretending to be this kind of working class caricature, because he knew that in the post-war era, working class votes were extremely important in an era of mass democracy. So what we're going to look at today, we're looking at Smear, Wilson and the Secret State, written by Stephen Dorrell and Robin Ramsey. It's a great book. It gets plaudits from Philip Knightley, who was the journalist for the Insight team in 1968, I think it was, that proved that when Kim Philby had defected to the USSR, that this wasn't the defection, as was said at the time, of some kind of junior MI6 desk clerk, but the head of counterintelligence. So, plaudits indeed. And what we're going to do today is we're going to look at the proposed coup. And that never happened. That was planned against Wilson. You can see this in the, I think might be season 3 or season 4 of The Crown, and it's what is portrayed in that episode is quite faithful to the official record. So Wilson wins in 1966. He wins a second election in 1966. In 64, he came to power. He has to win a second election because he has a very thin mandate in 64. He wins again in 66, and he gets his majority. And the people who disliked Wilson particularly and wanted the Tories back in power was a kind of a cabal of bankers, right-wing newspapermen, members of the aristocracy, army officers, and Secret Service guys, MI6, MI5, MI6 guys. And the reason why they particularly want him out, not only is it because this is the kind of the wider social pool from which sort of feeds the Conservative Party, but this is the kind of like the Conservative class bloc of Great Britain, who, if you ever get to talk to any of them, will pretty confidently tell you that there's no real reason for any other political party ever being in power. Every so often, you might need a kind of a Labour character to oppose the government when it goes a bit too far. But for the most part, you always want the Tories in power because they are the sort of the proper people. And the idea that a party of the working class, which, I mean, Labour, you have to kind of do an awful lot of cognitive dissonance to imagine that that's what Labour actually is. But this is really something very, very toxic and very, very harmful and against the natural order of things. Wherever you're listening to in the world, no doubt you have a version of this, whether it's the Republicans in America or your local homegrown version. But it is how class rule works. Anyway, Stephen Dorrell and Robin Ramsey write. In 1966, with Wilson out of their grasp, save for the next 4 years, with his large parliamentary majority, the British bankers' machinations began to shift from economic manipulation and pressure to more covert political means. With the departure of Cromer from as governor of the Bank of England, his role as spokesman for the Bank of England and City was taken up by Cecil King. If you remember a few days ago, when Mick Wright came on the podcast, he was talking about Alfred Harmsworth. Cecil King was Cecil King Harmsworth, one of the Harmsworth dynasty. And he was the proprietor, he was the chairman of Daily Mirror newspapers, and the proprietor of the International Publishing Corporation, and also a director of the Bank of England. So a key part of the kind of the British Conservative establishment. And he was the son of Lucas White King, professor of Oriental languages at Trinity College, Dublin. His mother was Geraldine Adelaide Hamilton, the Harmsworth, daughter of Alfred Harmsworth, the first Viscount Northcliffe. And so he was, part of this kind of ascendancy of the Harmsworth dynasty. King becomes the vanguard for the anti-Wilson movement. Although King had begun sniping at the Labour government through his newspapers, he was still regarded as vaguely on Labour's side, principally because he knew working class people read his newspapers and that was about the size of it. In 1965, he'd been appointed as part-time director of the Bank of England by the Wilson government. This appointment had major unintended consequences for Wilson, for King, apparently ignorant of macroeconomics, became a captive ear for bankers. He was also a member of several very important intersecting circles. King had a number of advantages over Lord Cromer, owning newspapers for one thing. For another, he was able to play public politics, whereas the governor of the Bank of England could not, or not so overtly. From mid-1966 onwards, King talked obsessively of an economic crash bringing 3 million unemployed and social chaos, which could be avoided only by that old standby, a national government to restore confidence. Reginald Maudling and Sir Alec Douglas-Home, both Conservatives, had first tried to force this on the Labour government during the first speculative attack in November 1964. Following his first Labour budget, and Cromer had persisted with this for the next year and a half. To this national government idea, King added a particular twist. He wanted a national government with non-politicians, businessmen drafted in. There's always a kind of a tendency somewhere in post-war British history for this kind of thing, this kind of almost like neoliberal elitism. And this is before we even, we can even establish ourselves as being in a kind of a neoliberal moment. But this idea that the businessman technocrat is sort of like a modern wizard in some way. They are gifted with these kinds of powers that other human beings aren't, of understanding this thing called business and this thing called economics. And, mystically and magically, they can cut through the chaos that is at the heart of modern life and sort of make things happen which will do something which will, somehow have an outcome that is pleasing to all.
Life insurers put life into the things you live for. The new factory that's hiring your neighbors. Maintenance on the bridge that keeps traffic flowing. The paycheck that puts pizza night on the table. Life insurers contribute $8 trillion to the U.S. economy through bond purchases and other investments, and protect the financial security of 90 million American families, like yours. See how life insurers put life into America at acli.com. Paid for by the American Council of Life Insurers.
Building a business may feel like a big jump, but OnDeck Small Business Loans can help keep you afloat. With lines of credit up to $100,000 and term loans up to $250,000, OnDeck lets you choose the loan that's right for your business. As a top-rated online small business lender, OnDeck's team of loan advisors can help you find the right business loan to fit your needs. Visit OnDeck.com for more information. Depending on certain loan attributes, your business loan may be issued by OnDeck or Celtic Bank. OnDeck does not lend in North Dakota. All loans and amounts subject to lender approval.
With McValue at McDonald's, you don't just get deals on the drinks. You get deals on McDonald's drinks. So when you're breaking a sweat, embrace the chill without breaking the bank. And when your crew is running on empty, keep your wallet full while refreshing the squad.
Ace the vibe check with drinks like lemonade, frozen Fanta Blue Raspberry, or any size drink for just $1.49. Limited time only. Price and participation may vary. Cannot be combined with any other offer. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
I mean, there is an element of that you hear echoing in kind of fascism, that you need suddenly the decisive, charismatic strongman to cut through all this talk and this waffle and this stuff that people don't really understand, and bring order and decisiveness to the workings of society. The first reference to this idea in his diaries is on the 24th of July 1966, when he met with Louis Frank, chair of merchant bankers, Samuel Morgenthau. Frank, who had served with the British Security Coordination, MI6, and the Special Operations Executive during the Second World War, had been on the round of central banks, Belgium, Holland, France, Switzerland, and Germany, at the behest of the Bank of England, and said that some future government would have to have a large business element. In such a government, he foresaw prominent places for Alfred Robbins and myself. No wonder that a national government with businessmen appealed to King. Centre stage was a beckoning. From this point on, the theme crops up regularly in his diaries. A fortnight later, when he asked George Brown was one of Wilson's ministers, about the national government, again on the 13th of August, when Dennis Hamilton, chief of the Times, told King that both Harold Macmillan, and Rab Butler, Butler had been Macmillan's chancellor, both foresee a national government. And the following February discussions on this subject are recorded by King and Roy Jenkins. Roy Jenkins was one of Wilson's ministers, later on in the 1980s to form the Social Democratic Party, who was not interested, and with Conservatives leaders Ian MacLeod and William Whitelaw. From the beginnings of 1967, King and Daily Mirror editor Hugh Cudlip devoted Saturday mornings to seminars on the state of the nation, discussing what would happen and how soon, and who, in various activities in the land, could be of any use at all when the fabric of British society, the fabric of the British way of life broke down. King took the lead, but according to Cudlip, on issues there was a basis of wide agreement between us as to the cause of no conflict, and the cause of no conflict until King convinced himself in 1968 that nothing would be achieved without his personal intervention in national affairs. Others were having similar thoughts. The focus of the plotting was a network around Robert Renwick, which had formed in the 1950s in pursuit of commercial television. The trio at the centre were Norman Collins, Renwick, and C.O. Stanley. Collins had resigned as controller of BBC Television in 1950 and began campaigning against the corporation. As well as wide-ranging connections in the radio equipment industry, the financial world, and the Institute of Directors, Renwick was an important fundraiser for the Conservative Party. Stanley was chairman of Pi Limited. This trio formed the first commercial broadcasting company, Associated Broadcasting Development Company, and also a campaign group called the Popular Television Association. It worked also. It worked closely with the anti-socialist pressure group Aims of Industry, and the Conservative Central Office, which swooped personnel for the campaign. In 1967, which swapped personnel for the campaign. In 1967, former Liberal MP and broadcaster Michael Winstanley was approached by a senior ATV executive with a plot to break into a television news broadcast and announce the formation of a new political party. The Albert Hall had been booked for a mass rally, and the holding of this rally was going to be announced on all 3 TV channels by broadcasters, all known to me, Winstanley personally, who had undertaken to interrupt their programs and make the announcement before the program director had time to pull the plug. The organisers included people who had once been prominent in public life, had a lot of money from business behind them. They wanted Wilson removed to make way for a coalition of the centre, precisely what King's national government would have been. Among the organisers of this plot, Winstanley was told, were Lord Beeching. Beeching had famously devastated the railways. Eric Fletcher, Deputy Speaker of the House of Commons, 2 obscure Labour backbench MPs, some leading Liberals, and Robert Renwick. Most of this grouping were also part of the King network of the period, and we assume that its major figure was Renwick. As chief fundraiser for the Conservative Party, Renwick was also the focal point between British capital and the Tories, one of the key backroom figures of the time. In late July, talking with Lord Mountbatten, Prince Charles's uncle, Hugh Cudlip discovered that Mountbatten had already been approached to play a part in some kind of post-democratic regime, but had apparently declined because he was too old. Was this the Renwick group, or was there a third undetected cabal? Apparently unaware of this Renwick cabal, King was working along similar lines. So this is interesting that amongst this kind of the conservative sphere in the late 1960s, there are several groups planning to overthrow Harold Wilson. Mountbatten, war hero, murdered by the IRA, was and I said he was Prince Charles's uncle. He's not. He's the Queen's uncle. Had turned this down. Perhaps he saw a stupid idea when he recognised one, and quite possibly, he may have been many things, but potentially a traitor. He was not. To go up again to think about removing an elected British Prime Minister, you have to, in essence, constitutionally, the only thing you can do is get the Queen to ask the Prime Minister to step down. And I think to recruit Mountbatten to do that would have been, even for an egomaniac like him, very, very difficult. And I don't think the Queen would perhaps have looked very favourably on this. So King was working along similar lines. He too was thinking of Mountbatten as the figurehead for his emergency government. It should be emphasised that King wanted a coalition of the centre, not a takeover by the right. King had been talking to people like Joe Grimmond, Reginald Maudling and Ian MacLeod, these are centre kind of figures. The Labour Party people he admired were Richard Marsh, Alfred Robbins and Brian Walden. Again, all people of around the political centre, and intermittently Roy Jenkins and Dennis Healey. His newspapers had urged readers to vote Labour in both the 1964 and 66 elections. King's notion of who would run the show after the Great Collapse was that it would be centrist politicians and big businessmen, the Robins, the Beechings, the Kittons, from manufacturing capital, not the bankers. King, meanwhile, continued his soundings, seeing Ian MacLeod on the 8th of September 1967. We discussed possible successors to Wilson, and he said he would accept Dennis Healey as leader of the Government of National Unity. Dennis Healey, who later becomes Chancellor of the Exchequer under James Callaghan, Wilson's successor. And I'm definitely not a figure on the left of the Labour Party.
Life insurers put life into the things you live for. The new factory that's hiring your neighbors. Maintenance on the bridge that keeps traffic flowing. The paycheck that puts pizza night on the table. Life insurers contribute $8 trillion to the U.S. economy through bond purchases and other investments, and protect the financial security of 90 million American families, like yours. See how life insurers put life into America at acli.com. Paid for by the American Council of Life Insurers.
Building a business may feel like a big jump, but OnDeck Small Business Loans can help keep you afloat. With lines of credit up to $100,000 and term loans up to $250,000, OnDeck lets you choose the loan that's right for your business. As a top-rated online small business lender, OnDeck's team of loan advisors can help you find the right business loan to fit your needs. Visit OnDeck.com for more information. Depending on certain loan attributes, your business loan may be issued by OnDeck or Celtic Bank. OnDeck does not lend in North Dakota. All loans and amounts subject to lender approval.
Callaghan was a possibility, and MacLeod had a growing admiration for the Chancellor. The best man they've got is James Callaghan, who was Wilson's Chancellor. William Whitelaw indicated support for Callaghan as a coalition leader, and as had Lord Robbins the week before. And then there was always Lord Cromer, recently removed as Governor of the Bank of England. Cromer is obviously contemptuous of the deflationary measures taken so far, does not think that they will be carried any further, expects a crisis in April, further devaluation in July. I urged him to consider himself as a very possible outside minister to come in a national government. Though Callaghan later dismissed King's efforts as no more than a piece of amateur theatre, how seriously Labour took King at the time is suggested by the lengths they went to buy him off. On the 18th of September, and then again on the 24th of October, Callaghan had lunch with King to try to enlist him as a member of the government. On the 28th of November, Wilson tried to offer King membership of the Privy Council and a peerage. King would accept only an earldom, and Wilson was not prepared to create hereditary earls. This was totally contrary to everything Wilson had the egalitarianism Wilson had been trying to kind of stand for. In the new year, King turned to canvassing the cabinet. Richard Crossman recorded in his diaries. By the way, Crossman's diaries are an excellent read if you're looking to get a really good picture of political life in the mid-1960s. Richard Crossman recorded in his diary on the 12th of January 1968, having to sit there and listen to another lecture on the baseness of our present government and how good big businessmen alone could save the situation. This meeting is not mentioned by King. By the end of January, even someone hitherto as far from the King's networks as Tony Benn moving towards the left in the 1960s, heard that Alf Robbins was now evidently playing for the premiership of a theoretical coalition government. Wilson knew what was going on. Substantial sections of the press were engaged again in a Wilson must go campaign, which Wilson thought had substantial backing of Lord Shawcross, another member of King's circle. In no time at all, the other members of the Trinity, Robbins and Cecil King, were joining in the demands for a coalition of all the talents, Great Britain Limited, though there were some signs that its leading proponents might not agree on whom the Queen would be advised to send for prime talent. So, just kind of pause from there for a moment. If you look at the big historical sweep here, there is a huge chunk of the kind of this sort of reactionary establishment in Britain that 20 years after the end of the Second World War had not accepted the post-war consensus, the post-war settlement, the development of a welfare state, union power, corporatism, commitment to full employment, and the things like the National Health Service, and restrictions on currency outflows, and a much more directed economy. They were the kinds of people who, within a kind of a decade or so of the Wilson plot, were looking at a kind of a newly reborn Conservative Party emerging from 1975 onwards under Mrs. Thatcher. They were the kinds of people associated with right-wing think tanks, which exist and cause essentially havoc to this very day. They were the kinds of people who were able to use the growing network of offshore tax havens, who knew, and one didn't just get to kind of put one's money in places like this if randomly you had to kind of have the nod that that was a possibility. There is a kind of a permanent reactionary bloc in Great Britain from 1945 onwards that sought to undo the gains made by Britain's working classes after 1945. And this, in 1967, is one of those moments where they try. And Wilson came under, from 1964 to 1974, a decade of attacks, kind of relentless, really, to eventually bring him down. it did a huge damage to his mental health, and he was a very, very suspicious and paranoid man by the end of his time in office. He had a degenerative illness of some description. He later, died of dementia later on, but it was perhaps some kind of degenerative neurological condition beginning in the mid to late 70s. But he was retired, and in no small part due to the fact that he was fending off the kind of reactionary sector of British public life that sought a return to a country that they were more familiar with before the Second World War. Anyway, I hope you found that interesting, and I'll catch you on the next Explaining History podcast. Thanks very much. All the best. Bye-bye.
Are you a homeowner looking to sell your home fast and want your cash now? How about getting cash for your home twice? Hi, I'm Sarah Reynolds, CEO of Reynolds Empower Home Team with Keller Williams. Our cash offer stands above the rest. With our cash offer, you get the majority of your funds based on your home's value right away. That's right, cash in the bank within days. We will then sell your home for top dollar and you get the rest. Yes, with our cash offer, you get paid not only once, but twice. Call us now at 703-637-SOLD or go to DebbieHasTheBuyers.com.
Welcome to It Takes Energy, presented by Energy Transfer, where we talk all things oil and natural gas. Oil and gas drive our economy, ensure our country's security, and open pathways to brighter futures. When it comes to meeting the world's energy needs, more is better. What we mean is our world needs a wide range of energy sources to meet our increasing needs. Just wind or solar won't get us there, as the sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow. With our growing population and the increasing use of energy-demanding technologies like AI, reliability is key, and the reliability of natural gas is unmatched by wind and solar. That doesn't mean we all can't work together, but natural gas is vital to ensuring we meet our energy needs. Look around, and you'll see the essential role oil and gas plays in our lives. Our world needs oil and gas, and people rely on us to deliver it. To learn more, visit energytransfer.com.